The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the executive office, blurring the city skyline into a smear of gray and charcoal, a reflection of the storm raging inside Lucas's heart. He stood there, dripping wet, his cheap suit clinging to his shivering frame, mud splattered across the cuffs of his trousers, and a smear of grease staining his white collar. Across the mahogany desk sat Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Dynamic, a man known for his ruthlessness as much as his brilliance. Arthur didn't look up from the tablet in his hands, his face a mask of cold fury, his jaw tight. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the downpour against the glass and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. When Arthur finally spoke, his voice was low and devoid of empathy, cutting through the air like a serrated blade. He told Lucas that punctuality was the bedrock of trust, and that Lucas had shattered that trust for the last time. He didn't ask why Lucas was late. He didn't ask about the blood on Lucas's sleeve or the tremor in his hands. He simply uttered two words that ended Lucas's world. "You're fired." If you believe that kindness is never a wasted effort and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Join our community of storytellers who believe in the power of humanity. Lucas felt the floor drop out from under him, a sensation of vertigo so intense he had to grip the back of the leather chair to keep from collapsing. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in his throat, choked back by the sheer humiliation of the moment. He wanted to scream that he had a valid reason, that he wasn't just lazy or irresponsible. But looking at Arthur Sterling's icy demeanor, he knew it wouldn't matter. This was a man who measured worth in spreadsheets and time cards, not in human struggle. Lucas nodded slowly, the fight draining out of him, and turned to leave. The walk from the executive suite to the elevator felt like a funeral march. He could feel the eyes of the secretaries and junior associates burning into his back, their whispers following him like ghosts. He went to his cubicle, the small, gray box that had been his second home for 3 years, and began to pack. He placed a framed photo of his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, into a cardboard box. Her smiling face, missing a front tooth, pierced his heart. She was the reason he endured the long hours, the reason he swallowed his pride every day. Since his wife, Sarah, had passed away 2 years ago from cancer, Lucas had been the sole anchor for Lily. He promised her he would take care of everything, but as he taped the box shut, he felt like the biggest failure in the world. The morning had started with such promise, or at least the desperate hope of it. Lucas had woken up at 5 a.m., determined to beat the traffic and prepare for the quarterly review that was supposed to secure his promotion. He needed that raise. The medical bills from Sarah's treatments were still lingering like a dark cloud over their finances, and the rent on their small apartment in the suburbs was due in 3 days. He had ironed his shirt, packed Lily's lunch with a special note, and dropped her off at school early. The rain had started then, a light drizzle that quickly mutated into a torrential downpour, turning the highway into a slick, dangerous river of asphalt. He was making good time, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his battered sedan, resetting his pitch to the empty car. He was 20 minutes ahead of schedule. He was going to make it. He was going to save them. Then he saw it, ahead of him, on a winding stretch of road bordered by a steep embankment and a dense thicket of trees. A sleek black SUV lost control. It hydroplaned, spinning wildly across the lanes, before clipping the guardrail and flipping over. The vehicle rolled twice, the sound of crunching metal sickeningly loud even over the roar of the rain, before coming to a rest upside down in a ditch, smoke instantly billowing from the undercarriage. Lucas slammed on his brakes, his heart hammering against his ribs. He checked his watch. If he stopped, he would lose his buffer time. If he got involved, he would be late. For a split second, the terrified face of his landlord and the stern face of Arthur Sterling flashed in his mind. But then he thought of Sarah, and how she always stopped for stray dogs. How she believed that life was precious above all else. He couldn't drive past. He threw the car into park, ignored the blaring horns of the cars behind him, and sprinted into the rain. The scene was chaotic. The SUV was crushed, the windows shattered. Lucas slid down the muddy embankment, tearing his suit pants and losing a shoe in the muck. He scrambled to the driver's side, but the door was jammed shut. Inside, the driver, a young woman in her early 20s, was unconscious, slumped awkwardly against the steering wheel. Blood was trickling down her temple, and the smell of gasoline was sharp and terrifying. "Hey! Can you hear me?" Lucas screamed, pounding on the glass. No answer. He saw flames licking at the rear of the vehicle. Panic surged through him. He looked around for a rock, a branch, anything. He found a heavy piece of debris from the guardrail and smashed the passenger window. The glass shattered, cutting his hand, but he didn't feel the pain. He crawled inside, the heat intensifying, the smoke stinging his eyes. He unbuckled the girl, her body limp and heavy. She was so young, barely older than a teenager. She looked like someone's daughter, someone's whole world. With a grunt of exertion that strained every muscle in his back, Lucas dragged her out of the wreckage, pulling her through the mud away from the burning car. He got her to a safe distance, just as a small explosion popped the tire and sent a fireball rolling upward. He collapsed beside her in the rain, checking for a pulse. It was faint, thready. "Come on, stay with me," he whispered, wiping the rain and blood from her face. He took off his suit jacket and covered her, trying to keep her warm. He heard sirens in the distance. Someone else must have called 911. He stayed with her, holding her hand, praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in a long time. When the paramedics arrived, they took over instantly. "You saved her life, men," one of the EMTs shouted over the storm. "She would have burned." Lucas nodded. Dazed, he realized then that he was 40 minutes late. He didn't give his name to the police. He didn't wait for a commendation. He just ran back to his car, desperate to salvage what was left of his future. He drove like a madman to the office, the adrenaline fading into a cold dread. He tried to clean up in the bathroom of the lobby, but the mud was deep in the fabric, and the blood on his cuff wouldn't wash out. He ran to the elevator, praying for a miracle, praying that Arthur Sterling would understand. But Arthur Sterling was a man who didn't listen to excuses, and Lucas, paralyzed by the shock of the morning and the hierarchy of the corporate world, felt too small to explain that he was a hero. He just felt like a man who had lost everything. Now, sitting in his car in the parking lot with his box of belongings, Lucas wept. He gripped the steering wheel and let the tears come, hot and angry. How was he going to tell Lily? How was he going to buy groceries next week? He felt abandoned by the universe. He had done the right thing, the moral thing, and his reward was destitution. He started the engine, the sound sounding like a death rattle, and began the slow drive home. He stopped at a park on the way, sitting on a wet bench, staring at the gray sky, trying to compose himself before he had to face his daughter's innocent eyes. He dried his face, rehearsing the lie he would tell her that he decided to take a break, that he was looking for something better. He couldn't let her know how scared he was. Meanwhile, at the city's trauma center, Arthur Sterling was a man unraveling. He had received the call no parent ever wants to receive just minutes after he had fired Lucas. His daughter, Emily, had been in a severe accident. He had rushed to the hospital, his ruthless corporate persona shedding away to reveal a terrified father. He paced the waiting room, terror gnawing at his gut. Emily was all he had. His wife had left years ago, unable to cope with his workaholism, and Emily was the one bright spot in his cold, structured existence. If he lost her, all his money, all his power, all his punctuality would mean nothing. A surgeon emerged, looking tired but calm. Arthur rushed to him. "Mr. Sterling," the doctor said gently, "Emily is stable. She has a concussion and some broken ribs, but she's going to make it." Arthur let out a breath. He felt he had been holding for hours, his knees weakening. However, the doctor continued, "It was a very close call. The police report says the car caught fire moments after she was pulled out. Whoever pulled her from that wreckage saved her life. If she had been in there another minute, well, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. "Who was it?" he asked. "Who saved her?" The doctor shook his head. "We don't know. The police said the man left before they could get a statement. But the paramedics found this clutched in Emily's hand. She must have grabbed it when he was pulling her out." The doctor handed Arthur a plastic object in a biohazard bag. It was a standard corporate ID badge, cracked and smeared with mud and soot. Arthur took it, his hands trembling. He wiped the plastic against his shirt to clear the grime. The face that stared back at him hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was Lucas, the same Lucas he had looked at with such contempt only hours ago. The same Lucas he had fired for being late. The same Lucas who had stood there, wet and shivering, bearing the marks of a struggle Arthur had been too arrogant to ask about. The realization crushed Arthur. He sank into a plastic chair, the ID badge burning his hand. He replayed the morning in his mind, the mud on Lucas's trousers, The blood on his sleeve. It wasn't carelessness. It was the debris of his daughter's salvation. He had looked into the eyes of the man who saved his child's life and destroyed his livelihood without a second thought. Shame, hot and agonizing, flooded Arthur's chest. He had prided himself on being a good judge of character, on being a fair leader, but he saw now that he had become a monster, blinded by rules and devoid of humanity. He looked at the time. It had been 4 hours since he fired him. Arthur didn't wait. He didn't call his secretary or his driver. He ran out of the hospital, jumped into his sports car, and pulled up Lucas's employee file on his phone. He found the address, a small apartment complex on the other side of town, in a neighborhood Arthur usually avoided. He drove fast, ignoring the speed limits, driven by a desperate need to fix the terrible mistake he had made. He stopped at a florist and bought the biggest bouquet they had, then stopped at a toy store and bought a giant teddy bear, unsure of what to do but needing to offer something, anything. When he arrived at the apartment complex, the rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening and cold. He climbed the stairs to apartment 4B, his heart pounding louder than it had in any boardroom negotiation. He could hear voices inside, a child laughing, and a man's voice, soft and reassuring, though Arthur could hear the underlying strain of sadness in it. He took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened, and Lucas stood there, still in his white shirt, though he had taken off the tie. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked exhausted when he saw Arthur standing there, holding a teddy bear and flowers. Lucas's face went pale. He stepped back, shielding Lily, who was peering curiously from behind his leg. "Mr. Sterling," Lucas stammered, confusion warring with fear. I didn't take anything. The box is right there. You can check it. I didn't steal." "Lucas, stop," Arthur said, his voice cracking. The great CEO, the titan of industry, looked broken. Tears welled in his eyes, defying his composure. "You didn't steal anything. You gave me everything." Lucas looked at him, bewildered. Arthur stepped forward, dropping the flowers and the bear to the floor, and did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He wrapped his arms around his employee and hugged him. He hugged him tight, weeping into the shoulder of the cheap, stained shirt. "It was Emily," Arthur sobbed. "The girl in the car. That was my daughter, Emily. You saved her. You saved my little girl." The revelation hit Lucas like a physical wave. The girl in the car. The CEO's daughter. He stood frozen for a moment, and then, slowly, he patted Arthur's back. "She's okay?" Lucas asked, his voice gentle. "She's alive." "She's alive, because of you," Arthur said, pulling back, wiping his eyes. He looked down at Lily, who was watching with wide eyes. He knelt down, ignoring the dust on the floor. "Your daddy is a hero," he told her. "The bravest man I know." Arthur stood up and looked Lucas in the eye. "I am so sorry, Lucas. I was blind. I was cruel. I judged you without knowing the sacrifice you made. Can you ever forgive me?" Lucas looked at the man who held his fate in his hands, seeing not a boss, but a father terrified of losing his child. Lucas knew that pain. He knew it intimately. "There's nothing to forgive, sir," Lucas said softly. "I'm just a dad. I did what any dad would hope someone would do for his kid." Arthur shook his head. "No, you did what extraordinary men do, and I'm going to make it right." Arthur picked up the bear and handed it to Lily. Then he turned to Lucas. "You're not fired, Lucas, obviously. But you're not going back to that cubicle either. I need someone I can trust, someone with character, someone who acts when others freeze. I want you to be my head of operation. It comes with a significant raise, a company car, and a schedule that allows you to be here for her." He nodded at Lily. "And the company will cover any outstanding medical bills you have. I know about Sarah. I saw it in your file. I should have looked sooner." Lucas felt the tears finally spill over, but they weren't tears of despair this time. They were tears of relief, of a burden being lifted that he had carried for too long. "Mr. Sterling, thank you." "You don't know what this means, Arthur," the CEO corrected him. "Call me Arthur. And thank you, Lucas. You gave me a future with my daughter." They stood there in the quiet apartment, two fathers from different worlds, bound together by a terrifying morning and a miraculous rescue. Arthur stayed for dinner, ordering the finest pizza delivery the city could offer, and listened to Lucas and Lily talk for the first time in years. Arthur didn't check his phone. He didn't think about stock prices. He just felt grateful. Before we reveal the final moments of this journey, I have a special request for you. If this story touched your heart, Please leave a comment below saying kindness matters. Let's flood the comments with positivity and show the world that good people still exist. The next day, Lucas walked into the office, not as a fired employee, but as a partner. He walked beside Arthur, head held high. When they passed the spot where he had been fired, Arthur paused and placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. Never be on time if it means walking past someone who needs help, Arthur said loud enough for the floor to hear. That is the new company policy. Lucas smiled, looking at the view of the city, which no longer looked gray and hostile, but bright and full of promise. He had stopped to save a stranger, and in doing so, he had saved himself. He pulled out his phone and texted Lily. "Daddy's coming home early today. Love you." The storm had passed, and the sun was finally breaking through.